He wanted to be famous, not for violence, not for fear, but for music. Instead, his name would be spoken in courtrooms, whispered across Phoenix, and eventually tied to the harshest punishment Arizona can give. For weeks, people were being gunned down in places that should have been safe. Parking lots, sidewalks, apartment complexes. No warning, no pattern anyone could see, and no suspect anyone could name. Police didn't realize it yet, but they weren't dealing with random chaos. They were chasing one person, moving silently through the city, and getting bolder every time. And when the truth finally came out, it revealed something even more disturbing than the killings themselves. Because the crime that ended it all didn't just expose the killer, it exposed who he was willing to destroy to avoid being caught. At first, nothing about the shooting seemed connected. Phoenix officers were responding to call after call, each one sounding routine on its own. A report of gunfire here, a body found there. Different neighborhoods, different victims, no obvious motive tying them together. The victims weren't involved in gangs, they weren't targeted for money or drugs. Most of them were just going about their day, in the wrong place at the worst possible moment. That randomness made the cases even more unsettling. Detectives worked each scene separately, collecting shell casings, canvassing for witnesses, checking cameras that showed nothing useful. No one had seen the shooter. No one could describe a face. And every lead seemed to dead end just as fast as it appeared. To the public, it felt like a city under pressure. To police, it felt worse, because deep down they were starting to realise this wasn't coincidence. And the first attack would soon make that painfully clear. It began on a quiet night in late November. Two young men sat inside a parked car in a Phoenix lot, just talking, killing time. Nothing suspicious, nothing dangerous, the kind of moment that never makes the news. Someone else was there too. Without a word, without a warning, shots rang out. The glass shattered. The silence vanished. And just like that, both men were hit. They never had a chance to run, to react, or even to understand what was happening. When officers arrived, the scene raised more questions than answers. The victims were still in their seats, no signs of a struggle, no robbery, no argument that led up to it. Whoever did this had walked up, fired, and disappeared into the night. There were no witnesses who could describe the shooter, no cameras that caught a clear face, and no explanation for why these two men had been chosen. At the time, it looked like a senseless act of violence, but it was only the opening move. Just days later, it happened again. This time, the victim was walking alone, heading toward an apartment he'd been to countless times before. He wasn't looking for trouble, he was just trying to get home. But in the darkness, someone closed in on him. The attack was fast and brutal, a brief struggle, then gunfire. He collapsed on the sidewalk before anyone could help. When police searched the scene, something immediately stood out. The victim's work weapon was gone. So was a necklace he never took off. This wasn't just an execution, it was a theft. That detail changed everything. Because now, investigators had to consider a new possibility. This wasn't random rage. Someone was taking trophies. Someone was keeping what they stole. And over the next 2 weeks, the violence didn't slow down. It multiplied. Different apartment complexes, different victims, same outcome. Each death adding pressure, each scene feeding the fear that a single person was moving freely through the city. But the mistake that would expose him was already waiting to happen. Then the case took a darker turn. A woman failed to show up where she was expected to be. Hours passed, then a full night. By the next day, hope was already fading. When her body was finally found, the scene was impossible to ignore. She had been left in an alley, partially unclothed. The signs told investigators this wasn't just another shooting. Something far more personal had happened before her life was taken. As disturbing as the discovery was, it came with something detectives hadn't had before. Evidence the killer couldn't outrun. Male DNA. For the first time, there was a biological fingerprint tying the attacker to the crime. A quiet breakthrough that wouldn't mean much to the public yet, but behind the scenes, everything had changed. Investigators believed the spree might finally slow down. They were wrong. Because before that DNA could point to a name, the killer made a move so reckless it would end everything. The call came in around midday. Shots fired at an apartment complex. Another address, another potential crime scene. When officers knocked on the door, a man answered calmly, too calmly. He said his name and claimed nothing was wrong. But blood told a different story. It was smeared on his hands, soaked into his clothes, and pooling on the floor behind him. He tried to explain it away, said he'd cut his hand, said he was alone. The officers didn't believe him. They stepped inside and immediately found the truth. 2 bodies lay on the floor, riddled with gunshots. And the shock didn't stop there. These weren't strangers or random victims. One was his mother. The other was her partner. As officers moved to detain him, his calm vanished. He threatened violence, resisted arrest, and had to be forced into custody. But the damage was already done. Because the crime that ended the spree wasn't just another murder. It exposed who the killer really was and what he'd been hiding in plain sight. Once investigators secured the apartment, everything unravelled fast. In plain view, they found a handgun resting on the couch. It wasn't registered to the man they had just arrested. It belonged to someone else. Someone already dead. Nearby, more pieces surfaced. Car keys that didn't belong there. And around his neck, a familiar necklace. One that had been reported missing after an earlier killing. Ballistics did the rest. Shell casings from different scenes spread across the city, all told the same story. One weapon, one shooter. The same gun used again and again. Then the DNA results came back. The evidence recovered from the woman found in the alley matched the man in custody. No speculation, no coincidence. A direct link between the crimes and the person sitting in an interrogation room. In a matter of hours, weeks of fear collapsed into a single name. But the question investigators still needed answered was why? And the answer was buried in a past he thought everyone had forgotten. On paper, his background didn't point to a monster. He came from a family known for community work and activism, a name that once carried respect in Arizona. From the outside, it looked like he had every chance to choose a different path. But years earlier, that path had already cracked. As a teenager, he was pulled into a violent robbery that ended with someone losing their life. Even though he didn't pull the trigger, the law didn't see a difference. He went to prison, spending most of his adult years behind bars. When he was finally released, he told people he was done with that life. He talked about music, about turning pain into lyrics. He even gave himself a new name and started posting videos online, chasing attention and validation. For a moment, it looked like reinvention. But freedom didn't bring peace, and whatever he was carrying didn't stay buried for long. Because just months after walking out of prison, the violence returned, worse than before, and aimed at anyone who crossed his path. After his arrest, the case didn't move quickly. It stalled. Years passed as motions were filed, hearings delayed, and the world itself shut down. From his jail cell, he wrote letters insisting everything was a setup, claiming he wasn't a killer at all, but an artist being falsely accused. When the trial finally began, the strategy was clear. Prosecutors didn't rely on emotion, they let the evidence speak. The stolen weapon, the necklace worn in court, the car keys, the DNA, the phone records. One piece after another, locking into place. By the time jurors heard it all, the story was impossible to ignore. The verdict didn't take long. Guilty on every major count. Then came the harder decision. Not whether he did it, but what should happen to him now. Jurors weighed the brutality, the number of victims, and the fact that even family hadn't been spared. Days of deliberation ended with the harshest outcome the law allows. But the sentence didn't bring an ending. It opened the door to something far quieter and far longer. A death sentence sounds final, but in Arizona it rarely is. For most people on death row, time stretches on for decades. Years turn into lifetimes, spent waiting in a small cell, knowing the punishment is coming, but never knowing when. Some die of old age before the state ever makes its move. He joined a line that barely moves, more than 100 others standing ahead and behind him, all suspended between what they did and what's supposed to happen next. Some have already been waiting longer than many people watching this have been alive. Not days, not years, generations. So the real question isn't just whether the jury made the right call, it's whether justice is found in the sentence itself or in the long, silent wait that follows.